Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're diving into the world of orthotics and how they can help people regain mobility after traumatic spinal cord injuries, specifically paraplegia. And you've given us a really interesting mix of medical texts and research papers, so clearly you're looking for a deep understanding.
Absolutely, and it's a fascinating area.
It is. Now, you probably already know paraplegia means paralysis of the lower body, but did you know the spinal cord itself actually ends around your lower back?
Yeah, that's right. Below that, it branches out into what we call the cauda equina, literally horse's tail.
Mm.
It's a bundle of nerves. And here's what's really interesting. Those peripheral nerves can actually regenerate, which offers some hope after injury.
Wow, that's amazing. So the cord itself can't regenerate though, right?
Unfortunately not.
So we're going to unpack how orthotics are tailored to specific injuries from things like central cord syndrome to the cauda equina. I'm hooked already. But first, let's get back to basics. Could you walk us through what the spinal cord actually does?
Sure, think of the spinal cord as a superhighway of information between your brain and body. It's constantly relaying sensory input up to the brain and carrying motor commands back down to the muscles.
Okay, so if I were to say, touch a hot stove.
Exactly. That sensation of heat would travel up your spinal cord to your brain, which would instantly send back the command, move your hand. And all of this happens in a fraction of a second.
It's amazing how smoothly everything works when it's functioning properly. But obviously, a spinal cord injury disrupts that entire process. What are some of the most common causes of these injuries?
Well, unfortunately, they can result from a lot of different incidents like car accidents, falls, sports injuries, and even violence. And sadly, young men are the most frequently affected group. The mechanism of the injury itself can also vary. You could have a direct blow that causes a fracture, or even forceful twisting that damages the cord itself.
It's frightening to think about how quickly life can change from one of those injuries. I know you mentioned that not all spinal cord injuries are the same. So can you elaborate a little bit on how they're classified?
Absolutely. The classification system really helps to guide treatment and predict potential outcomes. One of the most basic distinctions is between complete and incomplete injuries. A complete injury means there's a total loss of both motor and sensory function below the level of the injury.
So no movement or sensation at all.
Sadly, that's right. But with an incomplete injury, there is some degree of function that remains below the injury level. And this is where things get a bit more complex. There are actually several types of incomplete injuries, each with their own unique set of characteristics.
Okay, let's dive into those classifications a bit. What should we know about them?
All right, well, let's start with central cord syndrome. The damage is concentrated in the center of the spinal cord, and it leads to more paralysis and sensory loss in the arms than in the legs.
So someone with central cord syndrome might have more difficulty using their hands than walking. That's so interesting. What are the other types?
Another type is anterior spinal cord syndrome. This one affects the front portion of the cord, and it typically causes paralysis along with a loss of pain, temperature, and touch sensation. But interestingly, proprioception, the sense of body position, often remains intact.
Wait, so someone with anterior spinal cord syndrome might know where their leg is in space but wouldn't feel a touch? Wow. What else is there?
Then you have the really interesting case of Brown-Séquard syndrome. This is where only one side of the spinal cord is damaged. So imagine this. You lose sensation to pain and temperature on one side of your body, but you lose motor control on the opposite side.
Talk about mixed signals. That one really makes you think about how complex the nervous system is. Okay, what's the last type of incomplete injury we should know about?
The last one is cauda equina injury, and this involves damage to that horse's tail of nerves that we talked about at the bottom of the spinal cord. It often results in a combination of motor and sensory loss along with potential bowel and bladder dysfunction.
But you said the potential for regrowth with those peripheral nerves is what makes this one unique, right?
You got it.
Yeah.
Although the regeneration process is slow and often incomplete, those peripheral nerves have a chance of recovery, which is a big difference from damage to the actual spinal cord itself.
So understanding these classifications is really important for figuring out the best treatment and what role orthotics can play.
Absolutely.
Okay, so now that we have a good understanding of the different ways a spinal cord injury can present, what are the first steps taken after an injury happens?
The initial focus is always on stabilization and preventing further damage. That might involve surgery to address any fractures, stabilize the spine, or decompress the spinal cord.
I imagine it takes a whole team of people to help with an injury this complex.
You're absolutely right. It's a truly multidisciplinary approach involving physicians, surgeons, nurses, physical therapists, occupational therapists, psychologists, social workers, and more.
That makes sense. It's not just about addressing the physical injury, but also the emotional and psychological impacts. So where do orthotics fit into all of this?
Orthotics are a critical part of helping individuals regain mobility, prevent further injury, and adapt to their new reality.
I'm guessing there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to designing these devices.
You hit the nail on the head. Orthotics are highly individualized and tailored to each patient's specific needs and goals. The design process takes into account a whole bunch of different factors.
Like what? This is where it gets really interesting for me. Fill me in on the details.
Okay, well, first of all, age is a big one. A teenager is going to have different capabilities and needs compared to someone in their 60s or 70s.
Of course. A younger person might be able to handle a more robust design, while an older adult might need something lighter and easier to manage. What other factors go into that design process?
Gender also plays a role. Men tend to have greater upper body strength, which is essential for using crutches and leg braces.
But regardless of age or gender, wouldn't you say that the individual's motivation is a huge factor?
Absolutely. A highly motivated person, even with a more severe injury, can achieve amazing things with the right orthotic support.
It's incredible how the human spirit can overcome so much. What are some of the other factors you take into consideration?
Lifestyle is a big one. Someone who works on a farm, for example, will need a very different type of orthotic than someone who works in an office.
It's all about finding the right tool for the job, as they say. But what about sensory issues? How do those affect the orthotic design?
That's a really important consideration. A lot of individuals with spinal cord injuries experience loss of sensation in certain areas, making them much more susceptible to pressure sores and other injuries. So the orthotic has to be carefully designed to protect those sensitive areas and distribute pressure evenly.
That makes perfect sense. And what about spasticity? I imagine those involuntary muscle spasms can also be a challenge for orthotic design.
You're right, spasticity can be a major issue, and it often requires specific design adjustments to accommodate those involuntary movements and prevent complications.
So you're considering their range of motion muscle strength, the specific level of spinal cord in here. It's incredibly complex.
It is. And that's why it's so important to have a skilled orthotist who can assess all of these factors and create a truly customized solution for each person.
It sounds like a real art form, blending science and engineering with a deep understanding of the human body and individual needs.
You could say that.
Okay, I think I'm starting to understand the level of personalization involved in orthotic design, but you mentioned KAFOs earlier, knee, ankle, foot orthoses. Those seem to be a pretty common type of orthotic for individuals with paraplegia, right?
They are KAFOs provide support and stability to the knee, ankle, and foot, enabling individuals with paraplegia to stand and walk with the help of crutches.
So they essentially act as an external support system for the lower limbs. I'm curious, though, are there different types of KAFOs?
Yes, there are several different designs, each with their own advantages and disadvantages.
Okay, this is where I really want to know more. Let's break down those different types of KAFOs and see what sets them apart. Which one should we start with?
Well, let's begin with the classic Scott Craig design. It's a time-tested approach, but it does have some drawbacks. For one thing, it's permanently attached to the shoes, which makes it difficult to switch footwear.
That does sound a little inconvenient. What else should we know about the Scott Craig design?
Well, it can also be pretty heavy and bulky because of that extended metal stirrup. And it doesn't provide resistance to knee hyperextension, which can be a problem for some people.
So not the most versatile or streamlined option. What other types of KAFOs are out there?
There's also the conventional KAFO with 3 bands. It addresses some of the knee hyperextension issues with those additional bands, but it still has the downsides of being heavy and bulky.
Okay, so still not ideal. You mentioned a thermoplastic design earlier. That sounds a bit more modern. What can you tell us about it?
Right. The thermoplastic KAFO is definitely a sleeker, more contemporary option. It's molded to the individual's body using a special type of plastic, making it lightweight and relatively discreet under clothing.
So less clunky and easier to blend in. What's the downside?
The potential downside is that some people find the thermoplastic material can get a bit sweaty, especially in warmer climates.
Ah, the age-old trade-off between form and function. What's the last type of KAFO we should know about?
Last but not least, there's the combination KAFO. It actually combines the best of both worlds using a thermoplastic AFO section for the ankle and foot. But then it pairs that with conventional thigh bands for added support and adjustability.
Interesting. So it's kind of a hybrid approach to balance those pros and cons. That's helpful to understand the different options out there. But with all of these KAFO designs, I'm wondering how realistic is it for someone with paraplegia to actually walk using them?
That's a great question, and it's important to be realistic about the challenges involved. Walking with KAFOs and crutches is physically and energetically very demanding. It's slow, it requires significant upper body strength, and it can be quite tiring.
So not exactly a walk in the park.
Not quite. And for many individuals with paraplegia, a wheelchair might actually offer greater efficiency and independence in daily life.
So it really comes down to finding the best mobility solution for each person's needs and abilities. There's no right or wrong answer.
Exactly. It's about weighing the pros and cons, understanding the limitations, and ultimately choosing the path that best aligns with that individual's goals and lifestyle.
Well, this has been incredibly enlightening. You've really opened my eyes to the complexities and nuance of orthotic management for spinal cord injuries.
It's a fascinating field, and there's always more to learn.
I'm with you there. And we'll be back soon with part 2 of this deep dive, where we'll talk more about the realities of orthotic management and discuss the broader impact it can have on quality of life.
Welcome back to our deep dive into orthotics and spinal cord injuries. We've covered a lot of ground so far, from spinal cord anatomy to KAFO design. But you know how orthotics have advanced so much over the years, from those big metal braces to the sleek, custom-molded designs we see now. What kind of impact has that had on people's quality of life? That's a great question, and it really highlights a key point. While regaining mobility is obviously a huge benefit, orthotics can contribute to a much wider improvement in someone's overall well-being. Things like improved posture, reduced pain, greater independence in everyday activities. They all play a role.
Those are all massive wins for anyone, especially someone who's adjusting to life after a spinal cord injury. Can you give us an example of what that might look like in real life?
Sure. Imagine being able to stand up from your wheelchair and reach for something on a high shelf, or transfer yourself from your bed to a chair without needing help. These might seem like small actions, but they're huge steps towards autonomy and self-reliance.
It's about regaining control over your own body, which must be incredibly empowering. But I imagine there are challenges and limitations too, right?
Of course.
Yeah.
You have to be realistic. Orthotics can be heavy and bulky and sometimes uncomfortable, especially if you're wearing them for a long time.
It makes me think of that saying, beauty is pain. But in this case, it's more like mobility is sometimes a bit awkward.
Uh-huh. I like that. But you're right, there's a learning curve involved. People need time to figure out how to move and dress and just navigate their world with this new thing on their body. And there's also the maintenance side of things. Orthotics need regular adjustments and upkeep to make sure they're fitting properly and working correctly.
So it's an ongoing commitment, not a quick fix. Does that ever discourage people?
It can be frustrating at times, definitely. But most people find that the benefits outweigh the drawbacks. Being able to stand and walk and engage with the world in new ways can have such a positive impact on their confidence, self-esteem, and outlook on life.
It's inspiring to see how resilient people can be. But let's talk about the future of orthotics for a minute. Technology is always changing, so what are some of the exciting developments that are on the horizon?
Oh, there's some really groundbreaking things in the works. One area that's generating a lot of excitement is the use of exoskeletons.
Exoskeletons? You mean those powered suits that help people walk? It sounds like science fiction.
I know, right? But they're becoming a reality. Imagine a lightweight, responsive exoskeleton that allows someone with paraplegia to walk with a natural gait, climb stairs, even dance.
Wow. What else is new in the world of orthotics?
Another promising area is functional electrical stimulation, or FES. It uses electrical impulses to activate paralyzed muscle so people can move.
So it's like bypassing the damaged nerves and going straight to the muscles. It's like Frankenstein, but in a good way.
Uh-huh. Well, hopefully a bit more refined than that. But you've got the right idea.
Yeah.
And the results are pretty incredible. We're seeing people with paraplegia being able to stand, walk, and even cycle using FES systems.
That's amazing. So we're not just talking about assisting movement, we're talking about restoring it. Are there any limitations with FES right now?
One of the biggest challenges is fatigue. The muscles that are activated by FES tend to get tired quickly, which limits how long and how intensely someone can use it.
That makes sense. It's a really promising technology, but it sounds like it's still early days. What are researchers doing to improve it?
There's a ton of research going on, but one key focus is developing more efficient and targeted stimulation patterns so we can reduce fatigue and give people better control over their muscles. Another area is miniaturization and making FES devices implantable.
So instead of having those external devices, we might have fully implanted systems that are always working. That would be incredible.
Absolutely. And it's not just about mobility either. Researchers are also looking at how FES can be used for bladder and bowel control pain management, even cardiovascular health.
It's a really holistic approach to tackling the many challenges that people with spinal cord injuries face. I'm sensing a theme here. Everything from orthotic design to FES seems to be moving towards more personalized care.
Exactly. You're right. It's about restoring not just movement, but overall function and well-being. We
Mhm.
want to give people the tools they need to live fuller, more independent lives.
Well, this has been fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise.
My pleasure. I love talking about this stuff.
Yeah. And to our listener, I hope you're enjoying this deep dive as much as I am. We've seen how far orthotics have come and all the amazing things that are on the horizon. But in our final part, we're going to zoom in on what it's actually like to live with orthotics day to day. And we'll talk about why support and a positive mindset are so important. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into orthotics and spinal cord injuries. We've talked a lot about the science, the technology, the amazing potential of these devices, but now I want to focus more on the human experience. So if you're living with paraplegia and using orthotics to regain mobility, what's that actually like?
That's a great point, and it's something that often gets missed. We can talk all about biomechanics and design, but at the end of the day, it's about how these devices fit into someone's life, their everyday routine, their sense of self.
Right, it's more than just putting on a brace and walking out the door. It's a whole process of adapting physically and mentally. What are some of the hurdles people face when they first start using orthotics?
Well, there's definitely a learning curve. It takes time to really get the hang of the coordination and balance that's needed to walk with KAFOs and crutches. And it's hard work. It takes a lot of upper body strength and stamina.
I can imagine there's also a mental aspect to it. It must take a lot of focus and determination to keep going when every step is a conscious effort.
You're absolutely right. It's not just the physical part. It's about overcoming those mental barriers, pushing through frustration and staying motivated.
What about the more practical parts of daily life? Are there things that are extra challenging with orthotics?
Oh yeah, definitely. Simple things like getting dressed, going to the bathroom, navigating stairs can suddenly become a lot more complicated. And then there's the comfort factor. Orthotics can be bulky heavy, and sometimes they rub against your skin, which can cause sores or irritation.
It sounds like resilience and a positive attitude are pretty important.
Absolutely. And a good support system is crucial too. Family, friends, therapists, other people who get what you're going through. Being able to share your experiences, get encouragement, celebrate victories together, that makes a huge difference.
It's a reminder that you're not alone.
Exactly. And it's also important to advocate for yourself. Seek out resources. Stay up to date on the latest advancements in orthotics and rehab techniques.
Knowledge is power, right? The more you know, the better prepared you are to make good decisions and handle the challenges.
Couldn't agree more. It's an ongoing journey of learning, adapting, and figuring out what works best for you.
Well, this deep dive has been an eye-opening experience for me. We've covered everything from the spinal cord to exoskeletons and the personal journey of using orthotics. I can't thank you enough for taking us through all of it.
It's been my pleasure. Honestly, I could talk about this stuff all day.
And to our listener, we hope this deep dive has given you a good understanding of orthotics and how they can help with spinal cord injury recovery. We've covered a lot, but this is just the starting point. Keep asking questions, keep learning, and keep believing in what's possible.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And never underestimate the power of the human spirit.
Until next time, keep diving deep.